Wonderful. I'm delighted to be joined by Imogen Pierce. Imogen, very recently of arrival until a few weeks ago, now on the cusp of exploring some exciting new opportunities.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, you are very, very welcome. What I'd like to do is start with, I guess, your career to date, moving back from arrival. So you were with arrival, obviously an electrified bus and commercial vehicle manufacturer based in the UK for about 3 years. What were your roles at arrival?
So I wore a number of different hats, which I know for people who work in kind of quite traditional industries think, God, there's an awful lot of jumping around there. But I think as the company was growing, and I saw it from 350 people to 2,600, you're kind of forced to wear an awful lot of different hats within that time. So I joined the company as head of PR, which was really exciting because at that point, there had been not a single bit of press out about Arrival. I think, well, there'd possibly been one article, but really we were starting from a completely blank canvas. So that was an incredibly exciting opportunity. And then I moved into experience strategy, so starting to think about how do our different mobility products and services and our mobility ecosystem, how does it come together and how does it need to evolve as we sort of think about the future and the changing mobility landscape. And then in my last role, which was really just kind of an extension of that role, was thinking about, well, where does that mobility ecosystem live? Well, of course, it lives in cities and urban environments. And how can we partner and collaborate with cities to really understand their mobility requirements? So that was my last role, which sort of mean that I had a really interesting experience across kind of PR, product development, and policy, which was really fun.
And I guess a degree of engagement as well with various cities, etc. So it does seem a very interesting mix of strategy and comms type role. You of course come from a pretty traditional automotive background. You were previously with JLR.
Yes, so started off life as an aerodynamics engineer at Jaguar Land Rover, and honestly had the best time there. I think, certainly graduating as an engineer who didn't really know what they wanted to do, couldn't really understand where my engineering skills were going to be helpful to anyone. And you're suddenly in this enormous organisation and given this immense freedom to kind of explore and understand how the industry works and how the hell you go from drawing something on a bit of paper to actually putting it on the road. So started as an engineer and left the company in their technology and innovation comms, which again people see as a really obscure kind of move or transition, but seemed to make a tremendous amount of sense at the time.
Yeah, I don't know if it's obscure. I mean, it obviously matches very well to your skill set. One of the things that's very impressive, Imogen, is how quickly you've made these transitions between these roles. But I think one of the most impressive things about that, I mean, you were an aerodynamicist, right? So I happen to have a science degree myself. I know that fluid dynamics are some of the worst equations that have ever been. So that's as tough an engineering role as there is.
Well, I mean, I have a copy of my dissertation, I think, on my bookshelf over there. And I picked it up the other day and I was like, this is a foreign language to me now. I have no idea what any of this means. But I think really, particularly with fluid dynamics, it's a complicated puzzle that you're trying to unpick and trying to make sense of. And so I really enjoyed the kind of core mathematics bit of aerodynamics and sort of fluid mechanics more generally, which probably makes me a good mathematician, but definitely made me a terrible aerodynamicist. And I think it's because I've worked with people who could just look at a set of results and instinctively understood what's happening. And I've worked with many engineers subsequently who I think have that kind of innate ability to understand how a thing or a set of results or whatever it might be works. Whereas for myself, I was always having to go back to first principles and to understand what exactly was going on. And I think what that experience made me realise was that I care much more about the puzzle and how things sort of go together, and possibly having a much more kind of zoomed out perspective because of that as well.
Indeed, but also very, very clear that you're a very effective communicator, and it would be a shame not to pursue a career where that was an opportunity. And hopefully that brings us up to date somewhat. So where you're at the moment, I understand there's about sort of three strings to your bow currently in terms of your career. One of those is ethical AI, I understand.
Yeah, so it was one of those unfortunate things where I thought, well, if I update my LinkedIn in the middle of the night, people won't get these three apparently disparate strands. So yes, I'm working with an ethical AI company at the moment. They're in their sort of super early stages in it, and it's in that amazing fun bit where you're like, what on earth are we trying to do here? What's the kind of landscape? And working through some of their strategic comms challenges from, how we talk to investors, to customers, to people who use this product. And I think I wanted to do that because I love the automotive industry. I love the sustainability industry. But as we know, so many bits are, they're not discrete items. We need to consider kind of the future of AI in the same breath as the future of mobility. So I wanted to force myself to think about some other kind of technology as well. So it's a fun challenge for sure.
That makes very good sense. It's well put. There's a couple of other bits as well. One is some general consulting. Clearly, you have a very unique skill set that makes clear sense. Consulting to the automotive sector. But the third is perhaps a higher profile role. We understand you are joining our friends Bobby and Dan at the team at Fully Charged.
Yeah, which is super, super exciting. And I mean, the channel has grown enormously since its inception. And I remember going to the first Fully Charged Live event, which was, it seemed impressive at the time. And then having gone to the one that they had this year and especially in the midst of the pandemic, you just see that scale of growth and that kind of immense momentum that exists behind sort of sustainable technology and electric vehicles. So I've joined the team to kind of think about not just electric vehicles, but sustainable energy generation and storage, sustainable technologies, mobility. So a whole kind of room of stuff that I just love being, I think, to be honest, just a real nosy parker on and understanding what's going on in the world. So yeah, really, really excited to join the team. And I mean, there's an awful lot of the team who are super young and super talented. And I think it's the first time I've felt old, which is a bit of a shock to the system.
Yes, indeed. Unfortunately, that'll only continue from here. But I hate to break that to you. But yes, I mean, it's an absolutely fantastic product. It's a brilliant show, and I think the directions that can be taken are so exciting. So we certainly wish you all the best with that. That brings us on, I guess, the next section of the interview, and that's talking about kind of, again, the zoomed out picture. At Pod Point, we are really, majority of our time is focused on cars and vans, the electrification of cars and vans and providing charging infrastructure for that. Clearly, your role at Arrival and your perspective in general is more holistic. So you've talked about urban centres, public transport, to some extent, reading your Medium recently, talking about active travel, etc. Clearly, that's something that really engages you. What's the optimal way to move people around the cities, etc.
Yeah, completely. And I think, back in probably 2015, we really started to talk about autonomous vehicles. Autonomous, connected, electric and shared vehicles as, this is the direction that the mobility industry is going in. And it used to drive me absolutely mad because we talk about autonomous vehicles and think, oh, well, if we're not driving, we can sit back and relax and work more or eat a sandwich or something like that. And I think, no, that's so boring. That means that we will not consider the system as a whole. If you have an autonomous vehicle on your driveway, there becomes no incentive to use public transportation or to walk anywhere. And possibly then we end up with loads more vehicles on the road. And what autonomy presents us, and that's just sticking with that example, is a way to think about, well, how do these different systems interact and what are the perfect use cases for autonomous vehicles? And that to me is much more interesting. And in the same sense with electric vehicles, we have to think about it in that holistic way, because if we don't, we'll see that people who are, maybe have higher income individuals are able to transition to electric vehicles first, meaning that higher income neighbourhoods, and it's not always as high income neighbourhood, low income neighbourhood, but certainly high income neighbourhoods will experience better air quality more quickly. The charging infrastructure will follow that kind of critical mass of electric vehicles. And suddenly in lower income neighbourhoods, which we know already have poorer air quality, will have much worse air quality comparatively. So thinking about it in terms of transportation equity and the whole system, and bringing up the whole system to a new standard, I think becomes a much, much more interesting and complicated, but interesting challenge.
Yeah, I certainly agree. We often talk about the issue with a two-tier society. We have the luxury of, I guess, attacking the low-hanging fruit of the early adopters, but they do tend to be more affluent. And there is a concern about how we move to a full adoption of electric vehicles. So we see that in our world, but I guess also with the public transport, there's a sustainable use of resources argument. Shared mobility is going to be a lot more sustainable than individual car ownership.
Yeah, exactly. And when you think of kind of that shared set of resources, and there are some cities doing some amazing stuff. I mean, Manchester is a perfect example of thinking, how can they share buses between different kind of operators? And if I try and explain it, I'll definitely won't do it justice and we'll get it wrong, but worth looking up. And I think it is just a more sensible way to consider the system. But equally, if we are talking about public transportation, shared mobility, etc., all the connecting glue has to be considered as well. So how do you walk to the bus? And I found this particularly in my last role at Arrival, a shocking statistic that in the US, 61% of roads don't have a sidewalk on them. And that's urban roads, not motorways. So you think, well, how can people get the bus if you can't walk there or cycle there and those sorts of things? So then through thinking about shared mobility and shared assets, it forces the world of urban planning and urban development and mobility to come together to think about, all the different nodes in the system.
Yeah, the US is particularly challenged with that because they've literally built the cities and infrastructure around the car. The lack of footpaths or sidewalks, they say, is quite apparent if you spend much time there. One of the things, obviously, we rather focus on is charging infrastructure. And one of the more challenging applications for charging infrastructure is the urban centre, because there's a scarcity of off-street parking. The easiest thing in the world for us is to go and put a charging point into someone's home by their drive, and that's a lot of our activity. In your role at Arrival, how did you look to tackle the issue of how we're going to charge our fleet? Did you use much in the way of sort of behavioural insights data, anything to give kind of an insight into how best to solve that problem?
So with my Arrival hat on, I think we were enormously lucky that fleets understand their usage. They have all the data at their disposal, and vehicles typically come back to the depot at night for some period of time. So it's quite an easy challenge to solve. But I think thinking about some of the behaviours, in London, for example, I think a Tesco delivery driver might do maximum 30 miles. So how do you if you've only got 30 miles left of an electric battery, that looks like a very, very small percentage. And so does that kind of inspire trust? Probably not. And how do we need to educate drivers around that sort of thing? But I think outside of Arrival and thinking about this sort of more broadly, if commercial fleets suddenly have all of this infrastructure, which arguably is on private land, could that be shared with sort of the general public who maybe aren't charging overnight and could use it during the day? And how do you kind of optimise that system? And I know that companies like Fleet Charge, who are part of Just Park, are looking at those sorts of things, and interesting things from people like Zip Charge, looking at mobile charging as well. So I think I've given you a non-answer there, which is saying fleets are easy.
Yeah, no. I think that's an even more powerful answer. Well, actually, no, James. It's about putting the charges where these fleets spend their time, and that tends to be at depots. So, yeah, to say it's easy, I guess, is probably true compared to others. But the people who are trying to wrangle to bring enough grid to these depots probably don't find it super easy. But certainly, that's the place to put them. I think that's absolutely right. I was on a panel recently with someone from a bus company who was wrestling with exactly that challenge. And they were putting a huge amount of power into a depot and saying we only use it overnight. And it's completely empty during the day because all the buses are out carrying people around. So that's a really interesting sort of application and way to share those resources. Imogen, one thing, we recently had Emma Pinchbeck on Electric Insights, the CEO of Energy UK. And we talked a lot about diversity and inclusion. And there was one small section of that where she said, I don't know much about transport. But the changes to working patterns caused by the pandemic really highlighted to her how we've built cities around what has essentially been commuting men. So I want to ask that question to you. How important do you think diversity and inclusion is to the transport realm?
Oh my God, it is unbelievably important. And the kind of analogy that I always draw, and I apologise for this analogy in advance, but say you got a group of women to design a bicycle seat, a male bicycle seat. It would probably be a completely terrible product that would be enormously uncomfortable. And so actually what you need is the people using products and services to be part of the decision-making process such that the products and services are completely fit for purpose and completely reflective of the people that need to use them. And, I think the data and insights that we got during the pandemic of, well, these are the people who are trip chaining, these are the people who the kind of peaks of commute in the morning and evening don't apply to. And this is how actually the rush hour is over an 8-hour period, not a start and end of the day. That becomes, I think it was a bit of a kind of like, we need to really sort of think about these things. And I'd say that that's something that Arrival does incredibly well, of trying to think about all of those different users and really create a product that's very, very well considered for them. So I worked in the experience team, and they brought in a load of loads and loads of people with different ranges of mobility, so wheelchair users to people who are sort of visually impaired, to make that experience work for them. But if you don't have the diversity sort of in your workforce to call these things out or to say, this wouldn't work for me, so how would it work for XYZ? Of course you're not going to consider those things because you're not always aware of your biases, or you're not always aware of your experience not being reflective of somebody else's. So yeah, I think diversity to make sure that services work and work for everyone is absolutely essential.
Yeah, you made that seem incredibly obvious. I guess there's a book, that Invisible Women, which looks at a lot of these sort of, they talk about reference man, who is, it seems to crop up everywhere because it's just an assumption, as you say, almost an unconscious bias. But yeah, it's pretty clear when you think about it. But I guess that we haven't made better strides on diversity and inclusion is something, I guess, as a society we really do need to improve. Yeah,
and I think, some of the language that I experienced at school around sort of engineering, and this is no criticism on teachers, I think it's just sort of how it was that engineering is, my kind of vision of engineering was I'm probably going to be outside in a high-vis jacket and a bit cold all the time. And I think the best thing that happened when I went to Jaguar Land Rover was I walked into the design studio and it's beautiful. And, it's just a beautiful setting. There were cars being sculpted out of clay. And I think it was the first time that I was like, engineering does not mean cold, hard hat, high-vis jacket. It's so many different things. And it is just a creative discipline of creating solutions. So I do think we need at like a pipeline level to talk about the language, but also do everything that we can to keep women in businesses and make sure that they're, sailing through the ranks and present at every decision-making level as well.
Indeed, and of course other minorities as well, but certainly women being about 51% of the population, that omission is particularly glaring at certain decision-making levels. let's go back to the JLR space. So I guess the radical transformation of what a vehicle is going on, moving towards the three box design, engine, cabin, luggage, to the skateboard design, etc. That's profoundly exciting to any engineer, isn't it? What can be done with these spaces?
Yeah, enormously. And I think, there are things that do limit what we can do. So, for example, your crash structures, the occupant position, and the kind of the fundamental things of the vehicle architecture. But just the amount of kind of scalability of platforms we're seeing people like Re-Automotive and sort of putting all of the different components across the four wheels and thinking, well, that's amazing what you can suddenly do with that space. And, particularly with my Arrival hat on, the number of inquiries we had from van lifers who were like, this is a box on wheels, just think how I could optimize that space within an inch of its life. So that's really cool. And I do think it's going to take us some time for people to kind of switch their mindset to think, hang on a second, a car doesn't have to look how it's always looked. And I wonder how much, form follows function versus the emotional relationship that we have with cars throughout history and, in the media, etc., etc.
Yeah, I think the transition to electrification wrestles with a lot of those nostalgic elements as much as the practical. There's no noise. Yes, that's the sound of obsolescence. It's okay. We can move on. Thank you very much indeed, Imogen. I'm going to come on now to the quick-fire round. So we're now going to hit you obviously with quick-fire questions. So are you ready?
I hope so.
You seem supremely confident. Okay, first question. This is an integral equation from a... No, I'm joking. First up, what's your favourite electric vehicle?
Oh, this is a really good question. Am I allowed to say an electric Vespa? Does it count as a vehicle?
Yes, it is a vehicle. We will allow it. Does it exist?
Okay.
A Vespa making them, or is it a conversion?
So there are definitely people doing conversions. Less sure if Vespa are creating their own one. But if I'm not allowed a conversion, then I've recently seen the Cake bike, electric bike, which I think looks really, really cool.
Okay, well, Arrival and Jaguar Land Rover are heartbroken, but they understand your reasoning. You've now answered my second question. I'm going to guess it's a Vespa conversion. But what is your favourite retro EV conversion?
Oh, okay. No, I'd actually changed that. So I've been looking at Luna's recently.
Okay.
Now, Luna's is a fascinating company because they're looking at retrofitting rubbish trucks and also vintage cars. And some of the Rolls Royces that they have are just, they are pieces of art. They're beautiful.
Wrecking your Lady of the People sort of credentials there, but awesome. Yeah,
I can look from afar and admire from afar.
Right, fair play, superb. That's a great answer. Okay, tricky one here. What is your electric vehicle or sustainability highlight of 2021?
Ooh. So my last job at Arrival was working with, is this sort of individual or industry-wide?
I don't know if you watched Taskmaster, but the information was all in the question. So you can take this anywhere you like, essentially.
I would say sort of being really instrumental in sussing out relationships with cities between Arrival and Charlotte was really, really cool. I think to kind of figure out, well, here's where we're coming from, here are your challenges, how can we make this work together? That was really cool.
Fantastic. Charlotte's a wonderful city. I'm a Carolina Panthers fan, so I've been there a couple of times.
No way.
How about that? Okay, what's the most random fact you have about sustainable mobility?
Ooh. I don't know if this is random, but I think it's interesting. The smaller the thing, the bigger it can scale, the more insights you'll gather. So, for example, scooters are great, electric scooters, because deployed really quickly, really small, people, that means that it's a lower barrier to entry, high utilisation rate, loads of insights around how they're used and how they can impact the city. So I think that's cool.
Yeah.
Maybe a bit nerdy.
No, I thought that was really cool. I mean, you don't get much data insights out of an aircraft carrier, do you? But yeah, you can scale those very quickly. Very good answer to a very difficult question, I thought, when I saw that one. Okay, who is your most inspirational figure in sustainability?
Ooh, good question. This is one of those questions where, now that you've asked it, I can't think of a single human being, even if they're in sustainability or not. Do you know what? I am actually going to say my dad here.
Ooh.
And I'll tell you why. He is a real eco-warrior, which was really annoying growing up, because he'd be like, oh, you've had a 4-minute shower and that's a waste of hot energy. But he's actually made some tremendous amount of progress in sustainability in the NHS, and thinking about the global warming potential of anaesthetic agents, actually, and the amount of waste that happens in the NHS because of, safety requirements. So he has been sort of, shouting from the rooftops for a long time when sustainability was a bit of a, we know it's important, but we don't want to think about it right now. So I'd probably say him, and we have some good debates.
That is superb. So a shout out for the dads. My dad set up environmental assessment services in 1986, where he's still working. So go team environmental dads. Now let's go rather more negative. Who's your least inspirational figure in sustainability?
Oh. I think anyone who, I can't think of a specific person, but anyone who, they're using sustainability as a bit of a buzzword, and actually if you interrogate what they're doing, it isn't that sustainable, or it's still sort of burning something somewhere and trying to cover it up as sustainable.
So greenwashery, and you're too polite to name names.
Yeah.
Okay, fair play. We should move on. So what song would you pick for your electric road trip?
This is a good question. So we're having to think about this a lot at the moment, because we are planning a wedding. I think it would probably be our first dance song, which I'm going to keep secret.
Yeah, don't spill that one here. That's poor form. So secret. Maybe one day the world will know which one that is. Incidentally, I note also on your LinkedIn that you went on Britain's Got Talent. Now, was that for singing, or was that another talent?
Oh no! I mean, I cannot sing. I used to do a lot of gymnastics and kind of dancing, and it was part of that, which was an immensely embarrassing experience. Not least because I was doing my A-levels, hoping to sort of study engineering the next year, and Anton Deck interviewed me, and they said, oh, what's the ambition here for this troupe? And I was like, I think probably to do what we're doing on a bigger scale. And they were like, that's not very interesting. They said, could you say that you want to do a show in Vegas? I was thinking, no, because I want to be an engineer. So yeah, it's very, very interesting experience, I will say.
Tremendous. There we go. Also, it would be an unsustainable trip over there. So that's
exactly
concern. Right, back to our final quickfire question. Where would you go on your ultimate EV road trip?
Oh, so I have been looking at the... why is the name gone out of my head? Is it the Scottish 500 or the North 500?
Yeah, I can't remember the name, but I know exactly what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, I would really, really like to do that. And I think, especially during lockdown and all sort of the staycations that we had, just appreciating how beautiful the UK is when the weather's nice, but how beautiful it can be when the weather's nice. So would really like to do that.
Superb. Scotland is wonderful. I have been that way, if not an exact trail myself, and I strongly recommend it. Imogen, thank you so much for your time sharing your insights with us today.
Oh, no problem. It's been really fun. Thanks so much.